Hi, I'm Shyam Ranganathan, and this is a yoga philosophy video. And so this is the first of a few videos. I think I've got at least four planned on yoga philosophy in The Good Place, the TV show. So if you haven't watched the show, I highly recommend it. I didn't think I would enjoy it. It sounded kind of what little I heard and saw of it didn't depress me. And then I started watching it and I was totally blown away by what a fantastic show it is. If you're a philosopher, you probably love the show or you probably know about the show. It's certainly worth watching independently of any interest in yoga philosophy, but I think it's really interesting if you are interested in yoga to consider the show's exploration of themes of goodness and purpose in life. The show itself kind of takes as it goes along and as it ends, it kind of has this Buddhist twist to it. So, and that also makes it very interesting to think about or to use as a kind of as material for reflection on yoga philosophy. So the premise of the Good Place is that all humans are ranked on a point system by supernatural beings in charge of the afterlife. And those who earn a sufficient amount of points go to the good place. And if you don't earn a sufficient number of points, you go to the bad place. Okay, so there are four main characters uh, of the show. Eleanor, Tahani, Jason, and Chidi are four individuals who, by the point system, end up in the bad place. Okay, so but they are made to believe that they are in the good place as part of a scheme to torture them. So this is the really clever part, right? Because uh, you as a viewer also expect that this is really what's going on. They're in the good place, except Eleanor, one of the characters, she figures out that she doesn't belong in the good place, and she thinks place and thinks there's been a mistake. Okay, so very early on, you get her kind of freaking out because she feels like she's an imposter. But Chidi, one of the other four, is a moral philosophy professor, and he believes he deserves to be in the good place because he took moral philosophy so seriously. In fact, he took Kant very seriously, which, right, if I was to make a philosophy joke, would be like, well, he should have known he wouldn't have gotten into the good place, by taking Kant so seriously. But anyways, he's very serious about Kantian ethical theory. He took moral decisions very seriously, and so when he shows up in what is said to be the good place, he believes that that's consistent with his life experiences or his past life experiences. Eleanor, on the other hand, remembers her life experiences, and she doesn't belong. She doesn't believe that she belongs in the good place because she was never particularly an individual given to moral reflection. Okay. What I want to talk about in this video lecture is a clip from season 3. The episode is called Jeremy Bear Me. It's so quite a bit has happened by this point. Chidi finds out that he too did not earn enough points to get into the good place. The professor means there's no need for this comma. Sorry. Chidi finds out that he too did not earn enough points to get into the good place, right? Moreover, he discovers not only has he died, but he spent 300 years in hell, and none of his efforts to be good bore any fruit. Okay, so this is a kind of existential moment in the show where uh, one of our main characters has to come to terms with the reality of the futility of his past, right? So he has this past where he believed he was taking moral decisions very seriously, and he subjectively felt like he was deciding on the best moral considerations, and so he should have, it would be a very natural consequence, he believed, to show up in the good place. But it turned out that he drove all the people in his life crazy and mad because he was indecisive and he couldn't commit and he wasn't able to make decisions. And so the consequences of that type of life was really bad. That got factored into the point system. So there you have it. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you a clip from the show. It's kind of funny, where Chidi is having a breakdown, and the breakdown is a function of him appreciating the futility of his past. But it's also interesting because he indicts three common ethical theories in the Western tradition. And yoga is not one of those. It's in fact a distinct ethical theory. So uh, I will play this clip, and then I will talk a bit about yoga. I will say this about the clip. I was trying to access the show via Netflix, and they put in this block for screen capture, so I had to do it the old-fashioned way. I actually played it on my screen and then videoed that, so it looks like it's a 1970s rerun. Uh, the clip itself is covered by fair use, so I'm not concerned about that. But I'm just giving a little warning as to the quality of the actual footage. But the dialogue, the sound is fine.
You put the peeps in the chili pot and eat them both up. You put the peeps in the chili pot and add the M&Ms. You put the peeps in the chili pot and makes it taste bad. I'm gonna eat all this chili and or die trying. Anyone want any? I'm just gonna put it right down here. Come on, dip your paws in my chili. Scoop your little mittens right in the stew.
Professor, I can see that you're going through something, but exams are next week, so can you teach us anything?
All right, nerd. Want to learn something? I'll teach you something. I'm gonna teach you the meaning of life. How you like them apples? Now, over the last 2,500 years, Western philosophers have formed three main theories on how to live an ethical life. Now, first off, there's virtue ethics. Aristotle believed that there were certain virtues of mind and character like courage or generosity, and you should try to develop yourself in accordance with those virtues.
The gift will be anonymous.
Next, there's consequentialism. The basis for judgment about whether something is right or wrong stems from the consequences of that action. How much utility or good did it accomplish versus how much pain or bad? And finally, there's deontology, the school of thought that there are strict rules and duties that everyone must adhere to in a functioning society. Being ethical is simply identifying and obeying those duties and following those rules. But here's the thing, my little chili babies. All three of those theories are hot, stinky cat dookie. The true meaning of life, the actual ethical system that you should all follow, is nihilism. The world is empty. There is no point to anything, and you're just gonna die. So do whatever. And now, I'm gonna eat my marshmallow candy chili in silence, and you all can jump up your own butts.
Is that gonna be on the test?
Yes and no. And you all get A's or F's. And there is no test. And you all failed it, and you all got A's. Who cares? Goodbye. Goodbye.
Okay, so in the footage, we find Chidi indicting three common ethical theories from the Western tradition. The way he describes them is not entirely out of step with how they're often described in the literature. So one of the things that I've worked on a fair bit is translating and understanding moral philosophy from non-Western cultures, especially South Asia, and one of the things that I point out in my work is that one of the reasons that we find it difficult to understand or find or even discover non-Western ethical theory is because we think about these topics in terms of familiar examples, and we treat the names, like say virtue ethics or consequentialism, as names for the common theories that we are familiar with, right? But this way isn't very insightful. Really, we should be thinking about these topics in terms of what we can disagree about in moral philosophy, and then understand these theories as contributing to a disagreement. And when we put it that way, then we see all sorts of interesting similarities and distinctions in moral philosophy across traditions. And most importantly, yoga or bhakti is a fourth moral theory. So this graphic over here is a picture of my edited volume with contributions from wonderful scholars working on Indian moral philosophy, South Asian moral philosophy, and in that volume, I explore this way of thinking about ethical theory. I have a paper on yoga and ethics in there too. But anyways, what's important in this slide is that we can formulate every basic ethical theory in terms of some account of the relationship between the good and the right. So if we were to think about the basic topic that ethical theories disagree about, they disagree about what outcomes we should count as important, the good, what the good is, right? That's a debate about the good, and also how we should make decisions and the kinds of choices we should make. That's a debate about the right. And so every ethical theory is going to have something to say about the relationship between the good and the right. Okay, so the first ethical theory on this list is virtue ethics. So according to the virtue ethicists, if you put it this way, there are some people who have a good character or a good state of mind, and this goodness allows them to know what to do, what the right choices are. And so, and if you don't have that goodness yourself, you need to go find someone who is good, and they will tell you what to do. But in order to figure out what you need to do on this model, you have to go find someone who's good, right? And so, if you're a theist, right, and you believe in God, you are of the view that there's an ultimately good agent, God, who's in a position to tell us what we should be doing, right? And if you aren't good yourself, you have to go find this, you have to be devoted to this good God, because this good God is going to be the one who tells you what to do, all right? Okay. Then there's consequentialism. So consequentialism is the view that there are certain things that are good, maybe happiness, right? If that's your view, you'd be called a utilitarian. And then the things that we should do, the right, are justified insofar as they help us get those good things. Okay, so let's say the good that I'm interested in is money, and I'm considering a couple of different career paths, right? If the good is money, then I should choose some career that's going to help me get money, and I should choose the job that helps me get the most money, right? I should maximize the good. So if I have a choice between two jobs, I would choose the one that gets me more money, or maybe they're equally lucrative, in which case it's a coin toss. But the reason you do whatever you do is because it's supposed to get you that good. Okay, so that's consequential. There's lots of different versions of the theory. In the Indian tradition, for instance, I think Jains are examples of virtue ethicists. In the West, you have to look to Plato and Aristotle. In the Indian tradition, I think Buddhists are pretty classic examples of consequentialists, right? They think that suffering is something to be minimized. The minimization of suffering is a good. And then Buddhist Dharma and the teachings of the Buddha are justified insofar as they help you minimize suffering. Okay, then there's deontology. So a deontologist holds that there are lots of good things that we can do or have, but only a subset of those good things that we could do or have are actually justified, right? So for the deontologist, it's not sufficient for something to be a good action or a good thing to have. It really has to be somehow justified or rationally prescribed by considerations of right choosing. So Kant is a very famous deontologist in the Western tradition. In the Indian tradition, you can look to the Bhagavad Gita and the discussion of karma yoga as kind of a famous discussion of deontology, where Krishna argues that there are certain things that are your duties, and your duty is a good thing for you to do that's in fitting with your place in life, and your nature, and it's better to do that poorly than someone else's duty well. Okay, so virtue ethics, consequentialism, and deontology are kind of three very famous basic ethical theories in the Western tradition. Now, these are the ones that Chidi thinks are kind of the ethical theories to choose from, right? And he's having a breakdown. So one of the things that's interesting about all three of these accounts of ethical theory is that they all give primacy or kind of a basic importance to the good in the following sense, that the good is a kind of primitive notion in each one of these ethical theories, so that if for some reason you find yourself in a state of affairs where goodness is in short supply, then it would seem like all ethical theories are going to be pointless, right? So if good people are oppressed, then virtue ethics is going to be difficult to implement because you won't be able to find a good person to help you out. If there are just no good outcomes or no good options, then consequentialism will seem undermotivated. And if any good thing you could possibly do or have is somehow undermined by the realities of the world, right, then all of a sudden it seems like there's nothing that we can choose or elect in reality that we could do that would be good. So the first three ethical theories are really theories that expect goodness to be something in supply, not in shortage, and that we somehow have access to goodness as a primitive that we can then use to explain all the choices that we make. Now, Yoga Bhakti is different because it says that really the good is not a primitive notion. Rather, the basic notion of ethical choice is the right. And so, what we should be doing is we should be devoted to an ideal of the right. That's the Lord, defined by the twin characteristics of unconservatism and self governance. And as we're devoted to this ideal of personhood, we start to display these features of unconservatism and self governance in our behavior, and we thereby instantiate lordliness. And so, as we start to perfect the practice of yoga or bhakti, which means devotion, we bring about a good, but this good is simply the perfection of the practice. So, yoga bhakti is a kind of odd exception to the list here, because nothing has to be good in order for you to practice yoga, right? It is actually by virtue of your commitment to the right that you are able to bring about some goodness. Okay. Just said those things. Okay, so how then are we supposed to consider these, existential problems of motivation and meaning and purpose, right? So I think if you think that your choices are meaningful because of some good, and then the good itself is brought into question, right? Maybe it's in short supply, right? It's a pandemic. There's not a whole lot of good to go around. Maybe you are in a state of kind of political oppression, and goodness is constantly persecuted. In this context, a moral theory that tried to motivate what you should be doing in terms of the good would just leave to kind of add fuel to the fire of despondency, because it would seem like the only way that you could engage in some type of correct or meaningful action would require some goodness that's in short supply. But in the yoga case, right, the meaningfulness of our actions doesn't depend upon some good outside of us or, independent of our choices. Rather, it depends upon our devotion to the ideal of the right, and that in time, as we are devoted to this ideal, we bring about the good. So I think that for the yogi, the goal is not the good place, uh, it's rather the right place, right? And the right place is a procedure or way of approaching, accommodating, and dealing with life challenges. And the meaningfulness of life for the yogi then isn't measured in terms of the goodness of those contingencies, right? But rather in terms of the rightness of the response. And further, right, for the yogi, the right place is something that we can participate in everywhere that we are, because insofar as we ourselves are devoted to the ideal of persons or personhood, lordliness, all of our action becomes meaningful as a way for us to practice our own lordliness. And this way to practice doesn't depend upon us being any good at it, right? Because what makes it meaningful isn't that we're particularly successful at the practice, but rather our devotion to the ideal of the practice. But, right, for the very same reasons, given time, we actually start to change the world. And the reason that we change the world is because one thing in the world becomes better, and that one thing that becomes better is ourselves as a function of our commitment to the ideal of the practice of being a person.